the channel, I'd like to take us to Numbers chapter 10 and look at a situation where the Israelites are about to leave Mount Sinai and begin the journey to the Promised Land. Moses is trying to convince his brother-in-law to come with him. Let's look together at Numbers chapter 10, verse 29. Then Moses said to Hobab, the son of Reuel, the Midianite, Moses' father-in-law, "We are setting out to the place which the Lord said, 'I will give it to you.' Come with us, and we will do you good, for the Lord has promised good concerning Israel." Now, when I read a verse like that, it makes me think, what would it have been like to have been an Israelite walking in the desert, journeying day after day, night after night in the desert to a place you've never been before? There's no pictures or postcards to look to see what it's going to be like. All you have is the fact that God has said, "I will give it to you. I will give you this land, and it is a land flowing with milk and honey." God has promised to the Israelites to give them Canaan. And it's on that basis, faith in that promise, that Moses, convinced that the Lord will give them this land, he says to his brother-in-law, "Come with us, and we will do you good, for the Lord has promised good to Israel." I can only imagine that if I were one of those Israelites, every day when I stepped my foot upon a new piece of earth, every night when I made my bed and laid down my head, I would know this isn't my country. This isn't my home. I haven't reached the place yet that the Lord has promised to give to me. As Christians, we're not any different. As a matter of fact, Canaan promised to the Israelites was just a type, a picture. It was something that would represent something greater. It was something earthly that would represent something heavenly. It was something temporal that would represent something eternal. The eternal thing that Canaan represented is what we call heaven. It is that place that we long to go because God is there and Christ is there. And that is the place that God has promised to all of his children. Even to those children who believed his promise back with the time of Moses, he was promising to them something greater than that Canaan that they were journeying toward. We see this very clearly in the life of Abraham. If you would, turn with me to Hebrews 11. Let's look at the life of Abraham as he goes out in faith, believing the promise of God. Let's look at verse 8. "By faith Abraham, when he was called, obeyed by going out to a place which he was to receive for an inheritance. And he went out not knowing where he was going. By faith he lived as an alien in the land of promise, as in a foreign land, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, fellow heirs of the same promise. For he was looking for the city which has foundations, whose architect and builder is God." Let's look down at verse 13. "All these died in faith without receiving the promises. But having seen them, and having welcomed them from a distance, and having confessed that they were strangers and exiles on the earth. For those who say such things make it clear that they are seeking a country of their own. And indeed, if they had been thinking of that country from which they went out, they would have had opportunity to return. But as it is, they desire a better country, that is, a heavenly one. Therefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them." When we read this in Hebrews 11 about Abraham and about Abraham's children and how they were seeking not a country on this earth, but a heavenly one, that their hearts were longing for something greater than the types and shadows of the things in this world promised to them by God. They knew God promised something much better, and that's what they were longing for. That's what they were truly seeking after. And even though dwelling in the promised land, they dwelt as aliens and strangers, knowing that even then it was not their final destination. It was not their home. It was not their country. Now, when we think about all this and we think about what made it so that these people would long for that reality that they couldn't see with their eyes, that they could only have on the basis of the promise of God. And what that thing is faith. In Hebrews 11, verse 1, it says, faith is the substance of things hoped for. What that really means is that faith gives substance to those things hoped for. God has made promises, and we hope in his promises. And by faith, those promises, that hope that we have, has substance. Faith is the substance of things hoped for. That thing that we can't see becomes a reality that impacts our thinking and it impacts our feeling. And that's what heaven is in the life of a Christian. A Christian has a promise from God that we will enter into a promised land. We will come into a spiritual Canaan. We will come to heaven and be with God. We will be with Christ. All of this toil, all of this pain, all of the suffering of this world will end, and we will come into the presence of God to behold his glory forever and ever and ever. That is a promise. And for the Christian who believes that promise, faith gives that promise a reality, a substance in the mind and in the heart of that person. So much so that because we believe that promise, we actually think about that reality. We actually think about that heavenly Canaan that God has promised to us. And when we think about it, it has an impact on our affections. It affects us. It causes us to desire and to delight in that which we cannot see. Now, that doesn't mean, as Christians, that every day, all the time, all we think about is heaven. We have lots of responsibilities on this earth. We have lots of things that we need to be thinking about. But as a believer, because we have faith in the promises of God, the hope that's set before us has substance in our hearts and in our minds. Our thoughts are continually drawn to it, and our hearts are continually drawn out after God, desiring to be with him. This is why Peter could call the Christians to whom he wrote aliens and strangers. This is why Paul in Philippians chapter 3 could say that our citizenship was in heaven, because we have been affected by these promises. Our faith has latched hold of them, given them substance in our heart, and therefore we are drawn to them. What happens when this takes place is that every place we put our foot on this earth, every place we lay down our head, we know it's not our home. We know that we are journeying to something greater. We are aliens, we are strangers on this earth because we are looking for a city whose builder is God. We are looking for a country that is not of this earth, but one God has promised to us. And that has a real impact in our lives every day. Peter, when he says that we are aliens and strangers, uses that in the context of saying that this fact will cause you to war against those lusts that are in our hearts. In other words, those earthly, fleshly desires that war against your souls, you are aliens and strangers who fight against them. Paul uses it the same way in Philippians 3. Just before that, he talks about those whose God is their belly, who their desires are for earthly things. He says that we have a citizenship which is in heaven, which means we're desiring things which are above. We're setting our minds on things above. Colossians chapter 3, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. And when Christ, who is our life, appears, then we shall appear with him in glory. Faith believes those promises, and in believing those promises gives that hope substance in the heart. We think about it. We think about Christ. We think about God. We want to be with him. And that makes us to walk in this world very differently than we did before we had that faith. Now, sadly, there are many people who are flooding into the churches these days who believe in heaven. But they only believe in heaven because they know they can't stay here on this earth. Every person they've ever known either has already or will one day die and leave this earth. We can't stay. We can't make it a home because it's not going to happen. We know that one day, sooner or later, we have to leave this earth. And so therefore, they don't want to leave this earth and go into the great unknown, that place they've never been to, that place from which no one's ever sent a postcard. They don't want to go into that reality and take the chance that they could end up in hell. They want to go to heaven. If they're going to go anywhere, if anything's going to happen to them after they die, they want it to be something good, not bad. And so they want heaven. But if they really took time and thought and were honest with their hearts, they'd realize that they never think about heaven. The only time heaven comes to their mind is when they're forced to think about heaven. Something bad happens, maybe they get sick or ill, or somebody they love passes away, or the minister in their church preaches a sermon on heaven and makes them have to think about it. Otherwise, the thought would hardly cross their mind. And certainly those thoughts don't really affect their heart. They don't change their life. And so if they were honest with themselves, they'd realize that the only reason they want to go to heaven is so that they don't have to go to hell. And that's not a good reason. The reason we should want to go to heaven is because by faith we have seen that there is glory there, there is wonder there. As Moses said, we will do you good because the Lord means good to Israel. There is good going to the promised land. As a Christian, we believe it, and therefore it affects us. It has a reality for us. So many people, they don't believe in heaven. And if you could give them the chance to say you could stay on this earth forever, or you could leave and go to be with Christ in heaven, they would say, I'll stay on this earth. Let heaven be filled with the angels, and let me stay on this earth. The only reason they want heaven is because they know that they're going to have to leave this earth. But I don't want that to be me, and I don't want that to be you. I want myself and you to believe the promise of God. And in believing it, I want us to be affected by it. I want that faith to give that reality substance for us so that we will think about heaven. Maybe it's not every 5 minutes throughout the day, but frequently it will be upon our minds and upon our hearts. We will read about it in the scriptures. We will sing about it in the hymns and songs that we sing. We will delight in heaven because we know Christ is in heaven and we desire him. Above all things, we want to be with Jesus. Jesus said that that's what he wants of his people. He prayed to the Father in John 17, Father, I want them to be with me where I am. Jesus wants us to be with him. Do we want to be with Jesus? I hope this is encouraging to you. I hope it might also be convicting to you. And I hope most of all that it will cause you to practice faith in the Word of God. Believe him. Take him at his word. Let that faith take things you can't see and make them realities in your heart and in your affections. I pray this for you. I pray it for myself. Until we see each other again, bye for now.